Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Nicole, and I'm the Deputy Director from the Singapore Centre for Character and Citizenship Education. Our centre has been set up last year, so we are only 1 year old. And I would like to share with you a bit about what our centre is doing before I introduce Prof. Wiel Veugelers. So for our centre has got two major arms, one in research and the other in professional development. So for research, we are a team that spend a lot of time to eat, sleep, dream about CCE. And some of the things that we talk about is what is found in the middle of our entire pentagon for CCE 2021, where there's a focus on purpose, values, and social emotional learning. For us as a center, we want to ask ourselves, how does these foundational concepts in CCE interact with each other, and how does these three components really bring out the best in the students to allow them to flourish and to really anchor our work in CCE? We also ask ourselves, the entire curriculum that is articulated then is a means through which we want to be able to inculcate values, character, as well as citizenship disposition. As a team, we are looking into research in areas to understand what is the state of the art for CCE currently in Singapore and our Singapore schools. What is the role of school leadership, cultures, and ethos to allow for the immersive environment for our students to learn, to strive, and to be able to develop the disposition that we want to see in them for both character as well as disposition. Lastly, we also hope to champion pedagogical approaches that is suited for us in engaging our students for both character and citizenship education. For professional development, I would like to share that the current SFED level 1 to 4 courses will now reside with our center fully from next year onwards. And we are also in discussions with colleagues from schools and the ministry on workshops that they might be interested in. Just to share with you a bit earlier, currently there are a number of schools that has approached us to talk about E21CC and assessment together with CCE. How does this come together? What are the things that we should consider in looking at E21CC or assessment? Should any one of you or your school be interested to discuss a little more, then please let us know about it. I would also like to share with you that in our center, we bring over established scholars in the field of both character and citizenship education to be with us here in Singapore, so that we, together with this experienced academia, would able to then think about how we can advance the work in CCE. And we are really honored that we have Professor Wiel Veugelers with us for these 2 weeks, and this is the first of his series of seminars that he will be conducting for us in Singapore. I would like to introduce Professor Wiel Veugelers to you. He has been a professor of education at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht, the Netherlands. He studied developmental psychology at the University of Amsterdam from 1979 to 2015. He worked as a professor at the Graduate School of Teaching and Learning of the University of Amsterdam. Since 2002, he's also the professor of education at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht. And since 2019, he's appointed as Emeritus Professor. Prof. Veugelers' research and teaching is in the area of citizenship education, moral development, teachers' pedagogical professionalism, education policy, educational change, networking between educational institute, identity and citizenship development, as well as youth studies. He has also been conducting several international academic network, including the network Education for Democratic Intercultural Citizenship, in which 8 European universities work together in education and research. Prof. Veugelers has also received several international awards for his book, and the most recent one was the Outstanding Book Award by the SIG, Moral Development and Citizenship Education of the American Education Research Association this year. For the book, Moral and Political Dimensions of Critical Democratic Citizenship Education. This is a very good book, and if you would like to find out more about this book, drop us a note and we can let you know where you can purchase it. And in 2015, he also received the Kummerka Career Award for the Association of Moral Education. It is now my pleasure to invite Prof. Veugelers to deliver the lecture and seminar for today, Different Ways of Learning Values. Prof, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole Leah, for introducing me. And also, I want to thank the Center for Character and Citizenship Education of the National Institute of Education for inviting me for these 2 weeks and to work together with you on this important topic. And I'm also very glad to speak today to, but I also hope with, many teachers from Singapore. I'm very happy to be here. Before I've been here only a few days in Singapore, and now I'm for a longer period. And I think Singapore is a very interesting setting, and I'm very happy to speak with you about developing character and citizenship education in Singapore, but also worldwide. I think this is a very important topic, and we should pay attention to it. And I know that Singapore pays a lot of attention to character education and citizenship education. And I'm also happy that so many teachers today are with us in this session. So the session today is particularly about teaching and learning of values. And I want to introduce several theories and also to develop my own piece of theory. And I hope you can link it with your ideas and also with your practices. And I hope we also have quite a lot of time for questions and discussion later on. But first I will start with introducing some theories. So the title is Different Ways of Learning Values. And as Nicole just said, I'm working at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht, quite a small university, but linked with the humanist movement in the Netherlands. And humanism is recognized in the Netherlands as a worldview and has the same rights as religious. The picture you see Utrecht is part of the Netherlands, and the left is our main building of the university. And the front, there's a small canal. You cannot see it very well, but there's a small canal. And as you know, we have many, maybe you know, we have many canals in the Netherlands. Some questions that I would like to address in this talk. Do we still need moral values? In our contemporary society, do we need moral values, or is moral values something of the tradition? The second question, must education keep working on moral and character education? Is it the task of education to pay attention to moral values and to character development and citizenship development? And I also want to pose the question, are there different perspectives on learning values? And probably you will find that I'm speaking a lot about different perspectives. I think that's very important on the theoretical level, but also in the classroom. But let me first start with some traditional theories. And I begin my talk with Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, a few centuries before Christ, about 400 years before Christ. And Aristotle is considered as the starting point of thinking about moral development in the Western part of the world. I know at the same time, Confucius was also thinking about moral development. I know a little bit about Confucianism, but not that much. I'm not a specialist on that. But I'm aware that at the same time, also in Asia, people were developing theories and practices about moral education. But I'm focusing here more on the Western development, and later on I will try to link it more with developments in Asia. Aristotle used the word virtues. And ethics is, according to Aristotle, not merely a thing to speak about the practice. And virtues are, according to Aristotle, dispositions to act in certain ways in response to similar situations. So what we nowadays would call that competences, certain kind of behavior. But virtues also have, you could say, a moral drive, because virtues say something about what is good, what we say, what we as people find good. And in the rest of my talk, I will challenge a lot the concept of good, because people can have different ideas about what is good. But Aristotle really is focusing on virtues about doing the good. And examples of virtues, according to him, are courage, generosity, being friendly, so human dispositions to show your intentions, to be part of society, to help other people. So that's the virtues position. This has attracted always a lot in the Western world. In particular, in what now is called character education. And here's the cover of an important book by Thomas Licona about how our schools can teach respect. And character education would focus on virtues, on behavior. It has originally strongly the idea of fixed values, that values are always the same, that people agree on values, that there's no discussion about values. So the idea of fixed values is quite central in traditional character education. Character education is also strongly focusing on adaptation, adaptation to the culture, adaptation to the values that are dominant in society. Adaptation is a very central concept of character education. For education, that means that moral exemplars are important. Teachers are moral exemplars in character education. They show their virtues, their courage, their generosity. All those virtues they show in their practice. And as I said before, Licona, he really was a central figure in development of character education. And recently, Marvin Berkowitz is also very important for that. And also scholars from the Jubilee Center in Birmingham in the UK. So that's traditional character education. Later on, I'll come back to more new forms of character education. The second important strand in Western moral education is moral development. And you can position that in the process of modernization, in the alignment, the focus on rationality, and giving people an own voice. So that development in philosophy and in politics in Western society has stimulated the research on moral development. And important names are Jean Piaget from Geneva in Switzerland, and Lawrence Kohlberg, or Larry Kohlberg, from Harvard University in the US. And in particular, the work of Kohlberg has become very important and very central in thinking and practice of moral development. And maybe you know about the different stages Kohlberg distinguish and find in his research. But I want to speak more about the general idea of moral reasoning. Kohlberg had the idea, suggested by his research, that people can develop moral reasoning, that they can develop thinking, a process of thinking about morality, about what are good moral values, or how values are embedded in practices. So moral reasoning can be stimulated. And in that, people develop autonomy. People develop an awareness, but also the competences to live an autonomous life, to make their own decisions, to develop their own values. So this is quite opposite to the idea of traditional character education. Traditional character education says that the moral values coming from above, often from religion, they are fixed, and people have to accept them, take them over. Kohlberg and the moral development tradition, they are more emphasizing moral reasoning, and that people develop their own values in a process of autonomy. It's not to say that Kohlberg doesn't pay attention to other values than autonomy. Kohlberg also pay attention to justice. That's the highest level, according to him, of moral reasoning. That people use the moral value of justice to make decisions, to balance arguments. So justice is a very important value for Kohlberg. Also in his educational practice, he has tried, because he died in 1989, he has tried to practice his ideas in what he called just community schools. And he said that much education is focusing on adaptation, on following the rules, but we also can turn it around and making people more autonomous, giving them more influence in the learning process in schools. So he developed the idea and also the practice of just community schools that try to be as democratic as possible. It's not that the students determine everything, but they have some influence. So that was an important aspect of working on this idea. So both autonomy and justice were important for Kohlberg. On the picture is a book about Kohlberg, and so he's working there. The third strand of theory that I want to speak about is care. This has also become very important in thinking and practice of moral education. In the care approach, the focusing is on relationship, on connection, on responsibility, and avoiding harm. And it was formulated by Carol Gilligan, a former student of Kohlberg. And she was arguing, and also has shown that with research, that justice is too rational and it favors males. So Gilligan asked for more attention for care in education and moral development, and more focusing on relationship and connection. The philosopher of Stanford, Noel Noddings, is also working in this tradition. And she is emphasizing that experiencing care is very important for moral development. So we should not only, like the character education is saying, follow the exemplars, also not having the rational approach of Kohlberg, but also the experience and the experiences of positive relationship. So that's the care tradition. The next tradition I want to speak about is critical thinking and link this with moral values. Not all publications, not all theories about critical thinking are including moral values. But I want to stress that, and I think that's very important to link moral values to critical thinking. Because critical thinking is often not only a logical process of analyzing different arguments. No, there are moral values that often make the decision of this is good or this is not good. For example, when you discuss what is justice in a certain situation, or what kind of autonomy should people have. So therefore, it's important to include moral values in critical thinking. You have to do that by analyzing underlying moral values in different ideas, different practices, different behavior. So analyzing underlying moral values. What are the moral values embedded in a certain practice? But also critical thinking with an orientation to moral values challenge students also to take a normative position. How do I think about it? And this normative position, that's still quite open. It's quite neutral. But it also can take a more socio-political position in a situation that people are saying that it's very important that we get a more democratic society, a more justice society, and then you use those values to analyze the different arguments. So this is the kind of process of linking critical thinking to moral values, to pay attention to analyzing, to take an own normative position, and to analyze this normal position in a more socio-political relationship. What I'm saying about critical thinking is the same for reflection. You also can have this kind of orientations. Moral education is always relational oriented. Moral values are saying something about how you relate to the other, or not relating to the other. But the relational type, the relational part is very important for moral education. We saw that, for example, in the care approach, but it's interesting to see that outside the Western world, there are many examples of more relation-oriented moral education. For example, Asian perspectives on Confucius. And I've read very interesting articles from Asian scholars like Wing Li and Yasmin Sim here of the NIE, and Miao Hu from Taiwan, who wrote about the influence of Confucius thinking on moral development, on citizenship education. So that Asian perspective is very strong in the Asian, the Confucius perspective is very strong in Asia. And they're emphasizing a lot of relational view on moral education. We also find examples of relational oriented moral education in Islam and also in Buddhism. So it's not only the Western world who develops idea about moral education. And it's interesting to see how we both can learn from each other. In Africa, there you have people are speaking of Ubuntu, and that's also about living together, about a social being. Added to the book on education and humanism, with also international examples. We had a very interesting article from Leslie Lagrange from Stellenbosch University in South Africa about Ubuntu as form of humanism and paying attention to moral development. Also in Latin America, you have a lot of social movements who pay attention to a more relational-oriented moral education. In particular, the work of Paulo Freire. I'll come back to that in a few slides further on. And in many indigenous people cultures, we find a more relational-oriented moral education. So these are very interesting examples, and I think we should study them more. And I know in the Western world it's interesting for this kind of ideas. So we should try to learn as best from both sides of the practice. As I just said, I want to say more about the role of Paulo Freire in moral education, because he is considered as the founder of critical pedagogy. And Paulo Freire was a pedagogue working in Brazil and also later on in Guinea-Bissau. And when there was a dictatorship in Brazil, he was working at Harvard in the United States. But Paulo Freire, influenced by different traditions, different religious traditions, but also different political traditions, he developed a very strong pedagogy about empowerment of people and how pedagogy can contribute to that. And a very interesting slogan of him was that when you are learning to read, you learn to read the world, not the word only. So when you are using word, you also learn something about the world behind it, the context in which the word is used. So that was the basic idea of his language programs he developed. And he did that because of trying to give the underprivileged people a voice, to empower them. For example, normally we say you have the employer and the employee. The employer gives the work to the employee, but you also can say the employee does the work and the employer takes it. So it depends on which position you take. So in that way he was playing with the words and showing that different worlds are behind it. Paulo Freire really was aiming at social justice, transformation, make a more equal society, more just society. So he was really political oriented in a transformative way. As I said, he was the starting point of what is now called critical pedagogy. And nowadays, all over the world, people are using the work of Paulo Freire. And important scholars are Henry Giroux, Peter McLaren, but also people like Yusuf Wajib in South Africa, and people that I know in Hong Kong, in Taiwan. So all over the world, people are working with the ideas of critical pedagogy. Recently, more people are paying more attention to emotions, and so when speaking about character education, we were speaking about exemplars. When speaking about moral development, we were speaking about rationality. With care, we are speaking about caring for the other. And with speaking about critical pedagogy, we are speaking about change. But it's very important what kind of emotions people have, what kind of feelings people have. For example, when they are feeling safe, when they have fear, when they trust something, when they distrust something, when they have joy, when there are anger, when they think of efficacy, when they think they have no influence. So these emotional part of moral education are very important. And I think people have been realizing this more after the COVID crisis, after the complexity nowadays, after the use of social media, so that people really develop emotions as part of their moral values. I mentioned here the name Liz Jackson. She's from Education University of Hong Kong. She wrote an interesting book about it. So emotions are very important. A pity that I cannot see you and that we don't have discussion now, but later on we will have that somewhere. I want to go on and speak about some more recent developments, recent words that are used in recent series. First one is some people are using the word values education, and in particular it has been used in Australia. And values education doesn't have so much specific, more philosophical or more political tradition like the others we just discussed, but it's focusing on how values are embedded in the curriculum. And Terry Lovat of Newcastle University, he is leading some projects about values education in Australia. And then a very interesting and very popular approach is what is called social intuition or moral intuition, moral foundation, developed by Joachim Haidt, and he is saying that like Kohlberg, like in the Kohlberg tradition, many scholars in moral education play too much emphasis on cognition. That people are consciously making their arguments, consciously expressing their values. Jonathan Haidt is saying that's intuition. So acting without logical reasoning is more the practice. So we're saying that for moral education, we should pay more attention to social intuition. A third development I want to stress is that now people are linking a lot moral development and citizenship education. You can also argue that this is the challenge of the center here, to link character education with citizenship education. And I think that's very important. And then I like to rephrase the words of Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire was saying the pedagogy should become more political and the political should become more pedagogical. And I'm saying, rephrasing Paulo Freire, the moral should become more political and the political should become more moral. This linking of moral development and citizenship education has in particular developed in Europe by Helen Hayes of Bath University, Wolfgang Althoff and Fritz Ozer from Fribourg in Switzerland, and also myself. I've tried to link both development. The third recent development is what's called neo-Aristotelian character education, developed in particular by the Jubilee Center in Birmingham and by Christian Christiansen from Iceland, but working in Birmingham. And they try to use ideas of the other strands to make character education more flexible, more oriented to values, stimulating more the autonomy of people, and also try to be as best critical. So they try to update character education. And I think that's a good effort. But it's not always that easy to match different orientations. But it's good that people are trying to work on that. So that's the neo-Aristotelian character education. And the last one is that the linking of East and West. Wing Lee, before working also here in Singapore, now in Hong Kong, Kerry Kennedy in Hong Kong, and Yasmina Sim here of NIA, they try to link the East and the West, linking research on citizenship education and moral development developed in the West, but link that with ideas from Asia. So, for example, Wing Lee, they are speaking about Asian values, about the more community-oriented approach in Asian society, about the influence of Confucius. So they try to link those ideas with the Western idea of rationality, but also of care, of democracy. So the linking of the East and West is really a challenge. And I also hope to contribute together with my colleagues here at the center to work on that, because I think that's very important. So I kind of sum up halfway. What have I learned? What I really have learned is that it's very important to look at different perspectives, both of different theories, but also in practice, looking at different perspectives. And education cannot do enough on that. And later on, we will speak about controversial issues. But as you all know, it's not that easy to discuss controversial issues in classrooms. People should learn to use different perspectives. And I think it's very good if students start there at an early age of that. And also to start with that on normal things. For example, why you prefer certain food. Give some arguments, tell me what kind of sport you like, what kind of music you like. So, and are you familiar with other perspectives? So that they learn in an easy way to use different perspectives and not start with different perspectives when there are crises. So linking different perspectives should be both at the level of the theory and the level of the practice. What I also have learned is that moral values are very central in attitudes and in behavior. They really are embedded in that. And I think it's important to distinguish, to use the old distinction of knowledge, skills, and values. Knowledge is important. Want to give the example of democracy. You can have a lot of knowledge about democracy. You also can have a lot of skills, of democratic skills, like that you know how to vote, that you know how to discuss, that you know how to make agreements, consensus. But the most important thing is that you want to be democratic, that you have a democratic attitude, that you want to fight for democracy. So the value part of it are so important. So therefore, it's very important to keep speaking about knowledge, skills, and values. For example, the concept of competences. Some people are saying that includes all, but often then the values are lost. It's so important to keep speaking about the values. I also have realized, and it became more theoretical founded, how important autonomy is. If we have time for that, I also can speak about the autonomy developed in the Western world. And maybe I sometimes have the idea that that's gone too far. I will come back to that, yeah. Then social orientation. Like autonomy, I also find it very important that social orientation, the orientation on justice, not only thinking about yourself, but also thinking about the other, about society, about community. So the social orientation is very important. And I think autonomy and social orientation should stay together. What I also learned that values can be different in the context. When you discuss with people, often people have the same, think they agree on the value. But when it becomes more concrete, then you see the differences. On an abstract level, it's easier to have some agreement, but on the practice level, there are differences. That's not problematic, but it's reality. So we have to pay attention to the concrete context of values. I also realized that moral values should be used as criteria in reasoning. Use as much moral values. Why are you giving this argument? Why are you prefer this perspective? So moral values should be used in moral reasoning. As I said already several times, moral values are embedded in education, and in particular in citizenship education. Citizenship education cannot be considered as value-free. It considered ideas about what we find a good life, what we find a good society, what we find about good citizens. So moral values are embedded in that. And with all these educational activities, we are working on the identity development of students. We are trying to help them to identify an own identity, to develop an own identity. I think that's an important task of education. And coming back to the question of the beginning, does education still have a task in this? I would better say education cannot without it. It's part of the natural life of education to pay attention to identity development. And last but not least, teachers are an exemplar, but not like in the traditional character education, how would I say that best? No, but I'll say it another way. Teachers can have different roles, different ideas. For example, teachers can be very strict and these are important values, and I teach them. I preach them. But teachers can also help students in developing different moral values, different perspectives, and help them in formulating their own. And then these two different examples show that the idea of teachers exemplar can have different orientations. It's not using the concept of teachers exemplar doesn't include only one perspective. Now I will go on more elaborate on the practice of education. And then learning values, in my perspective, my theoretical perspective, it is what is called more social constructivism approach. And that means that learning is a personal process of giving meaning. Each individual, also young people, are giving meaning to what they see, what they hear, what they read, what they encounter. It's a personal process of giving meaning, not only good or bad, but also articulation about how you think about that. So that's a very personal process of giving meaning. But that is never done in isolation. Therefore, I speak about dialogical learning. In that, students develop together with other people their own ideas. So the personal process is always also dialogical. You have conversations with other students, with the teacher, with your parents, with your friends. You read things you see on TV, you see on social media. So the dialogical way is always there. So it's a combination of the personal process and the dialogical process. Therefore, I speak about three learning processes: reflective learning, dialogical learning, and I introduce democratic learning. That comes back at the end. But this is important to think in this way about learning. That makes the task of the teacher very complex. If you have a traditional idea of handing over information to the students, that's much easier idea than using a social constructivist perspective. You have to manage all those different processes and all those different dialogues. That's hard and important, but also very intensive work. When teaching values, we have to consider that moral values are embedded in all subjects. Sorry, typo. In all subjects, moral values are embedded, not only in moral education, in citizenship education, but also in history, in language, in cultural activities, in science, in biology. Gymnastics is an interesting example of the moral values embedded. So in all subjects of the school, moral values are embedded and teachers can work with them. Teachers need to have pedagogical goals. What are their goals? What is their purpose? What they want what they find important. It's not that those goals should be formulated as dictate, but that's the more general direction they choose for their education. Teachers also should realize that they formally never can be neutral. Of course, you can try to be neutral as possible, but always teachers are stimulating values. Always. I did a lot of research with students, and they're always saying, we can see and experience what values teachers find important. They don't even need to say it. We often realize it. So teachers stimulate values. That's not a problem. That's normal. That's normal part of their role. And students, in that social constructive perspective we just spoke about, use those ideas of the teachers, those values, but give their own meaning to it. They can reject them, They can reformulate them or they can just accept them. As you would understand, what I was saying, different perspectives are so important for teachers. You use as much possibilities to learn students to use different perspectives. Not only when there are controversial issues, and nowadays there are quite a lot of controversial issues in education about peace, about gender issues, about different cultural groups, about different religions. There are quite a lot of controversial issues. And in particular with controversial issues, it's important to use different perspectives. Not to say immediately, this is the best idea. No, use different perspectives and try to balance it and make well argued statements and explain and make explicit the moral values that you include in that. So use controversial issues, and I know that's not easy. Also in my own teaching practice, I found that quite difficult, but we cannot avoid that. And realize that teachers are, when teachers are working with students, they are involved in processes of inclusion and of exclusion. Inclusion is a concept that's used a lot in recent educational literature. It's about bringing people together, include them. But also at the same time, when you include people, you exclude others. So are aware of that and try to handle that in a moral way. So that's about teaching values. But values are not only part of the subject, but also a part of the school culture, the school climate. Students experience values of the teacher, the moral example of the teachers, of the way students have interpersonal relationships with other students, in the way education is organized. For example, they have to be in school on time. So they get some discipline to be on time. This is an experience of certain values. The way school is organized, the structure, the possibilities for dialogue, the possibilities for meeting together. So the organization is very important for experiencing values. You can say that the schools are moral communities in which students live together and learn together. As we all know, there's a lot of adaptation in school culture. You have to be on time, you have to work hard, you have to listen to the teacher. But also school culture can be a little bit more democratic. So we have to try to make school culture more democratic. I think a very important part of school culture is diversity. In many countries, also in the Netherlands, there's quite a lot of social and cultural segregation between the schools or between different strands in the schools. And from a point of view of moral education and citizenship education, it's very important when we don't have too much segregation, that people from different culture, different social class are living and learning together. I think that's very important. Therefore, I really support the idea of public schools, not private schools. And I'm happy to hear that here in Singapore, most schools are public schools. And coming back to the idea of moral exemplar, also it's good that important that not only the students show diversity, but also the teachers. Different social background, different cultural background, different religious background, different gender. It's very good if there is diversity among the teachers. And do we still need moral values in contemporary society? I think, and hope I have shown that moral values are needed for critical thinking. And even more now in a complex and plural society. Internet gives more possibilities for moral agency of students. So it's very important that in education we help students to be good moral agency. And we should realize also that the power of logarithms, the big company, is strong. But this is all also depending on values. So we should also show how values are working in that. And last, society needs strong democracy. I think it's very important that in all parts of the world, countries develop a democracy. That's not easy, as we also experience nowadays in Western Europe. Here's some slides about reflective learning and dialogical learning and democratic learning. And reflective learning is about articulate your own interests, your feelings, ethical and aesthetical concerns, your meaning making and moral values. So articulating. The second part of reflective learning is inquiring into the own identity development and reflection on the own learning process. And the third part of reflective learning is regulate the own learning process and taking responsibility for own autonomy and giving meaning. So that's reflective learning, the more personal part. Here we come to dialogical learning, the more interpersonal. Then it's important to communicate in an open way with other people, to analyze and compare different perspectives, to analyze the social, cultural, and political power relations involved. So this is more the dialogical way, and as I've been telling the whole time, dialogues are so important. And essentially on dialogues, according to ideas like from Buber, Paulo Freire, communication in an open way is important. So that people are willing to change their ideas. And with dialogical learning, it's important to analyze the power relations that are involved. In particular, if there is a link with citizenship education. Democratic learning. I've been adding this democratic learning because many people are speaking about reflective learning, many people speaking about dialogical learning. But often, and one of my students did an interesting research on that, often what's called dialogues are debates in which people are mostly fighting and defending their own arguments. They don't try to make a consensus. For example, in the Netherlands, for a while it was quite popular to play the House of Parliament of the UK. And then those two different groups, they were fighting the whole time and shouting. And so they were not trying to make some agreements. So therefore I added to democratic learning, that you show concern for others and appreciation of diversity, that you are open to jointly building agreements, but also that you stand for your own autonomy and critical thinking and action. So both open, but also stand for your ideas, and that you are involved in a larger community and in building democracy as a permanent process, and democracy as a process of both making consensus and respecting minorities. So democratic learning is very important, I think, and we should, in education, pay a lot of attention to it. To end, students should be challenged to learn more reflectively, dialogically, and democratically. It doesn't sound nice, but, but to pay more attention to reflection, dialogue, and democracy, and to develop their citizenship, their identity, hopefully what I call a critical democratic citizenship. And we all, citizens, scholars, and teachers, should appreciate more the moral work of teachers. They can play a crucial role in making society more democratic, just, inclusive, and sustainable. I think it's very important that society and policy are really supporting this moral task of teachers. And often I have discussions with teachers, and then they are saying, well, why we have to work so much on all those societal issues, and to pay attention to moral development and citizenship development. And then I'm saying, if the policy would say, you as teacher don't need to be concerned about the identity development, that's not the kind of education I would see. That would be a very formalized education, just learning some tricks and maybe a lot of technology, but just tricks, and that's all. So no interaction, no pedagogy, no working on the identity development of students. So I think the pedagogical role of teachers is very important. And I think I have the idea that Singapore does quite well on this, to support the teachers in this role. This is a book about a project I had with the eight universities in Europe. And this is open access. You can download it there. I also have a website and my email address if you have some comments or some questions. This is a new book. As you can see, moral and political dimensions of critical democratic citizenship education. With the subtitle, Enhancing Social Justice, the Global Orientation and Equity in Schools and Society. And in this book, I'm giving an overview of the work I've done in the last 25 years. And I'm very happy with this book. And I'm also happy with this book. I've been a few times visiting professor at Yogyakarta Negeri University, Yogyakarta State University, and giving their lectures about citizenship education. And they translated 7 articles of me in Bahasa, and also wrote an introduction and 1 chapter about Indonesia. And I'm very happy that they made this book. The cover, I think, I wouldn't have chosen this cover. It's a little bit, yeah. But yeah, but this is about theory and practice of citizenship education. I don't know if some of you can read Bahasa, but then you can try to find it or email me. Okay, thank you. I enjoyed telling to you. What a pity that I couldn't see you.
Thank you, Professor Veugelers, for such an informative talk. Okay, I'm sure all of us are going to have some questions for us to ask a few some deeper questions to Professor Veugelers. So maybe we can get you to just voice out your question. And before you pose your question, maybe you could give us your name and where you're from.
I don't hear anything yet.
Yeah. Okay, maybe everyone's a little bit shy. So how about this? Maybe we start off with the questions that were given to us before the start of the session. Professor Veugelers, there are some questions with regards to challenges in teaching values and addressing diversity in perspectives. So one of the questions here was, how can we encourage students to move away from giving politically correct answers? What's your view on this?
Yeah, I can imagine this question. As I was telling the whole time, look at different perspectives. And when people are giving political correct answers, then ask them if they also see other possibilities, if they also see other perspectives. And also ask them why they choose for this political correct answer. Even if it's politically correct, students should give some arguments why they choose for that. So I think as teacher, we really should challenge students to formulate their arguments, why they choose for that, and showing what they find important, which moral values are under it. But also, I think it's a danger just to say too quickly that this is a political correct answer. But I know what you mean. When teachers, when students are expressing a political correct answer, you must try to find what they mean very concrete. Try to let them speak about, that they can show that they have been thinking about it. So we shouldn't accept the political correct ideas, but having as much dialogue about it. I hope this helps a little bit, but I know this is not easy as teacher to work on like this. Another question we received already was, how do we impart and engage the new generation when it comes to values as to begin with? They have strong mindsets on certain issues at such a young age. Yeah, people have strong ideas often, and in a way, it's good that they have ideas, but we also should challenge them to inquire them, and it's not bad if they stay with their ideas, but they also must show us that they have been thinking about it, they have been inquiring it, that they have analyzed other perspectives. So we should challenge them all the time for why they are thinking this. And remember also, when we were young, we often also had quite strong ideas and thinking about what it means. But as educator, it's very nice that you can work with the young generation to help them in developing their identity and contributing to a more just and more democratic society. I see.
Okay, there's a raised hand from Jasmine.
Hi, Bill.
Hello.
Hi, good to hear from you. We'll see you, and thanks for mentioning me. I have a question because I also like Paulo Freire's ideas, pedagogy of the oppressed and many of his concepts, right? But these concepts are developed in a very different political, social, economic context as Singapore, right? And Singapore being a very political, social, economic context that's distinctly different from Brazil. So my question to you is, perhaps you can share with us your view on how can Paulo Freire's ideas be applied in the Singapore context, as far as you know? Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin, for your question. And as I said in the beginning, I'm very happy that to be here. And for the audience, Yasmin invited me already 10 years ago for giving a lecture here on NIE. And we have been in contact all the time and working together. And Yasmin is also one of the persons that is contributing to linking the East and the West, as I said before. And yes, it's not only Paulo Freire who has developed ideas in a certain context. And you can say that never people can transfer certain ideas to another context. It's the same also with ideas developed a long time ago. For example, ideas of Aristotle. It's not, you cannot transfer that directly to our modern time. We can learn from what Aristotle was thinking and was developing, and we can use some of his concepts. But be aware also that the own context is always different from the context that, for example, in the Old Greek. And for example, what we can learn from Paulo Freire for the context here in Singapore. And then I take the slide again about Paulo Freire. And the first point was reading the world, not the world. And this is also for Singapore. When people are, yeah, thank you. When people are using certain words in the context of Singapore, we should try to understand what this word means in that Singapore context. So there, also here, you can study by reading the word, not the word only. So don't use the word as a fixed idea, but a word in a context. The second point that in which I referred to Paulo Freire was in helping people, unprivileged people, in giving a voice, in empower them, in giving them more possibilities to influence their life, their community, their society. So empowerment and giving a voice can be done in all contexts. And I think it's very important everywhere, also in more what we call more democratic societies like the Netherlands. So it's very important to give people a voice, to empower them. So you also can do that in Singapore. And the third one, social justice, transformation, that you can say that that's the most political one of the three ideas of Paulo Freire. And that means that you try to change society and becoming more unequal and working on equity, equal chances, equal possibilities, less inequality. So that social justice transformation can be done in every country, in every nation. So also in Singapore. So you shouldn't use the work of Paulo Freire as a kind of Bible, a dictate how to work, but you can use some of his ideas to work and also in a country like Singapore. I hope this helps a little bit, Yasmin.
Yes, thank you for your for the clarity.
Okay. Some other person who has a question.
Is there anyone else who may want to ask a question? No, and perhaps we go to one of the questions that
I was looking at. So how can moral disagreement be resolved when the conflicting parties are guided by fundamentally different value systems? Yes, that's nowadays, but it also has been before, an important point. And it's not that easy. There are different ideas. But I think it's very important to stress that it's normal that people have different ideas. But we also have some, what we can say, nice way to live together. I'm not saying good, but nice way to live together. That you respect each other, that you follow the law. Of course, we can try to change the law, but as long the law is the rule, we follow them. So you can have different ideas and different perspectives, but it's important to follow the law, to respect other people, and also try to be serious about other persons, about other ideas. And I think a very danger is that you condemn very quickly other opinions. And what once a teacher was saying, when I condemn students, it's the risk that I'm losing, that they don't want to participate anymore, that they don't want to speak anymore about it in the class. So you should be very open as teacher, and even sometimes tolerate not very pleasant ideas. But it's important to, as that teacher was saying, to keep the dialogue open. To don't condemn them too early. Of course, we have to follow some rules, of course.
Okay, I think we have a participant who sent a question directly through chat, but the chat has been disabled. So maybe you can put your question in Q&A. Or would you like to voice your question out now? The chat function is not working, so maybe you can just put your question into Q&A.
Chat, there's one in the chat.
Yeah, Professor, we have a question in the Q&A.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's how do we afford autonomy? Okay. Maybe I'll just read the whole thing, the whole question out. Okay. She said, "Thank you for this insightful talk." Okay. The name is Elaine, and she's currently pursuing a PhD focusing on the engagement of preschool children as active and global citizens for an inclusive and sustainable world. So I could relate to what you have said and certainly concur that while it is critical for us to look at different perspectives, it is a complex task, especially when there are systemic challenges. My question is, how do we afford autonomy and agency to the educators who are caught in this systemic challenge? If we want to encourage them to afford the same to the students, this is by our participant, Elaine Ng. If you click on the Q&A, the whole question is there.
Yeah. The thing is that the person, thank you for this question, and how we can develop a learning route for moral education and citizenship education, that students not getting the whole time the idea that they are doing the same and getting cynical. It's very important to have a good learning route. And so often people are saying you should start near the student themselves and then to the community and then to the society. Partly that is true, but also there are several topics that are at a different age very relevant. And you can also use different methodologies to inquire. And we also can use a lot of bringing the community in the schools, and also the students go out to school to the community and also to other communities. So we should plan that quite well. So and therefore it's important that the curriculum, the formal curriculum development takes care of that in schools. There is a good planning for moral and citizenship education. So, but yeah, it's difficult to avoid the idea that it's always the same. So you should structure that quite well. Thank you for this question, Soya. Another question? Again,
Yes.
Jasmine, yeah? Jasmine?
I'm only asking if there are no other questions that people are asking. Okay. The curriculum we have in Singapore is called Character and Citizenship Education, right?
Yeah.
So the question to you is a little bit more theoretical. Is citizenship a consequence of character? It is not always self-evident. And should citizenship be a consequence of character or good character? Because the fields of character education and citizenship education are actually quite distinct, and there are differences. But in the way that we structure it, character and citizenship education, it seems almost that citizenship is a consequence of character, of good character. What is your view? Thank you.
Thank you. So in some of my writings, I've been expressed that the concept of citizenship was originally only located at the political level. But nowadays is also on the social and the cultural level, and about how people can live together, about what is the important cultural tradition in a country. So the citizenship education is also at the social and the cultural level. And that means that it will touch the identity development of people. It's about your daily life, how it is organized in the social and political context. And so therefore, the link between citizenship education and moral development is more stronger now than before. And you can also say that in citizenship education, the society tries to influence, or maybe better say, to help youngsters to develop their identity, to develop their character. So you could say it are two sides of the same coin. And I think it's good that there is a link between the character and the citizen, because also the character doesn't never functions in a vacuum. It is also always in a social and political context. So therefore, they are so much linked to each other. I hope.
Thank you.
You understand this. And you will agree with that, Jasmine?
Thank you. Yes, of course I do. But of course there are other perspectives, different perspectives, and we can take it on at another time.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question?
Then I take one question. They put a lot of questions on the website, so that was very interesting.
Maybe we just take one last question.
Yeah, you have one last question?
Yeah, okay. One last question then.
Yeah. About measuring and evaluating values. That's not easy. And you can, in particular, the more attitude-oriented aspect of values, how people are thinking, how people are thinking. So you can measure the behavior if they show it. But then you also not always know that's their own choice, their own motivation, or maybe it's only political correct. So it's not that easy to measure it. But if we go to an education that only validate what they can measure, then we get a very simple education. So I think as long as we think this is important, we should give possibilities to school to work on moral and citizenship development. So it's not that easy. You can try to evaluate it, and you can, of course, measure the knowledge. You can measure the skills, but the attitude measurement that's more difficult.
Yeah,
Okay.
Professor, sorry, there's one last question from participant. One last one. He said, Professor, what advice would you share with Singapore educators on how we can better enhance our character and citizenship education?
Oh, I hope we can visit the school this week. So I think they planned it already. That I'll visit the school. I really like to hang around in the school, to talk a little bit with the students, to talk with the teachers, to get a better idea about what's going on in Singapore. But what I want to stress, and that's the same like I'm stressing in the Netherlands, that you should get a very good balance between autonomy and social concern. In the Western world, and in particular in the Netherlands, sometimes it feels that autonomy has to become too big, too important, that people don't have enough social orientation. And what I know from Asia, social orientation for helping your family, helping your friends, helping your community is very important. So I think both in the East and in the West, they should find a good balance between autonomy and social concern. I don't believe in a kind of autonomy that's kind of very ego-oriented, only focusing on the self. I often use the words that we are a social self, that we always are relational. So I hope that teachers can balance that well. The orientation on both autonomy development, because I think that's very necessary for a democracy, but also for a flourishing life of youngsters, but also keep the social as a positive voice, not only presenting the social as a kind of control. So a very good balanced interaction between autonomy and social justice.